So this is an article from a couple of months ago, and since we've been talking about the arguments about AI, this one I think has a couple of interesting ones. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but we'll cover it. And yeah, I know it's way too late because they've closed the comment period. I'm not really using this as a call to action about the call to comments. I just wanted to cover some of the arguments because I think they're kind of worth preserving and getting a bigger audience. Like I've said, this is going to change a lot of things, how this works. How do you take the existing concepts in copyright law and apply them to AI-generated artwork? This is from one of the guys behind Invoke AI, and that's one of the open source Stable Diffusion implementations they want to use, and I really like them. They've got this unified canvas, which in my opinion is really a killer app that you won't find in Automatic 1111 or Comfy UI, but those others also have their recommendations, but still. This is a really good one. But not really, again, going over the call to action. I'm just going to go down to where they start giving their arguments. And a lot of this, of course, is going to have to do with copyright. As y'all regular viewers know, I'm against copyright and IP in all its forms. But it's going to be interesting to see how copyrights get applied to AI and how they should be applied, given that we do live in that kind of world where we're having to deal with copyrights and how much copyrights do the artists have and how much do the big corporations have and things like that. Let's get into it. Artists should have the inalienable right to train AI models on their own work, regardless of whether they currently hold copyright or other rights or licenses to the work. So ordinarily, if you create a work of art, you own the copyright. Automatically, you don't have to file any paperwork or anything, it just happens. Magically, you get these rights to it, and magically, everyone else is forbidden from doing anything similar. If you work for a company and you're doing it as what's called work for hire, you basically sign over those rights. So, for example, if you draw comics for Marvel, ordinarily when you draw a comic book panel, you would own that. But since you're working for Marvel and you're paid by Marvel, now Marvel owns it. And I mean, you can kind of see that because they need to be able to publish it and republish it and do stuff with it, but still your artwork, isn't it? So, should Marvel be able to stop you from training an AI with your own artwork? If you want to train a model with your own artwork, of course you want as many examples of it as you can get. Hang on a second. Oh, God, yep. November in North Carolina. Well, December now, actually. But yeah, that's what we're experiencing right now. But if you want to train a model with your artwork, you're going to need as many examples of it as you can get. And what they're saying here is you should have the right to use your whole body of work to train an AI model with your own art style. So they say large companies will often champion copyright as an important foundation for artists and creators to maintain control and ownership of their work, and ideally, copyright would do that. But sorry, they lie. An artist holds the copyright for their creation the moment they create the work and is granted legal protections. However, we know that, in practice, copyright is often forfeited to the large companies that employ these artists or to the handful of massive corporations who spend billions acquiring the rights of artists' intellectual property, as is the norm in entertainment and music. Even an artist as powerful as Taylor Swift had to re-record and re-release her old music to regain control of the IP after her record label sold the copyrights of her music to a private equity firm. Yeah, so she wrote all this music. The way the law works with music is you maintain the songwriter rights. but the recording belongs to the record label. And so her record label sold it all off. She lost all control. And so she still had the songwriter rights. So she had to re-record them all so that she could have rights to those new recordings. That's just one of the insanities of how it works. If we allow policies to be put in place that require an individual or corporation to have the copyright for all the works in a dataset used to train an AI model, we essentially solidify a centralization of AI power in the handful of companies that can afford to purchase or license those rights, leaving individual creators unable to compete in the growing economic opportunity that AI presents. Now, in my opinion, there shouldn't be IP at all to begin with, but given the framework of IP that's been set up, if training an AI isn't a transformative use, then nothing is. And transformative use, people are talking like transformative use is a part of fair use, but actually, although now it's kind of been categorized as a part of fair use, the concept of transformative use way predates fair use by like decades. So its protections are much older, much better recognized, and much stronger than other aspects of fair use. Having access to train and own their own AI model without having to pay license or subscription fees to the major tech companies would be crucial to artists' abilities to remain competitive. Artists should be skeptical about large companies that offer access to closed or proprietary models and datasets through licensing fees, while advocating that this approach is good or somehow more fair to artists. They do that all the time. Just like we were talking about with music, when they went sue happy and sued everyone for literally more money than existed on the planet. That actually happened, look it up. Because they were downloading music and they were saying, oh, well, you're just taking money from the artist. The artist wasn't seeing a penny of that. It was going into the pockets of UMG or whoever. The artists aren't seeing any of that. This isn't about helping the artists, it's about the big corporations. Invoke AI gives access to our generative AI studio for free to anyone to run locally on their computer. I love the ones that do that. Comfy AI, Automatic 1111. I've been playing around with the text generators, and I downloaded Ubabuga. I've been looking for some good models for that. They all run locally on your own computer. You can just yank out the cord and not be connected to the internet at all, and they'll still work just fine. I like that. I like being able to create, without having some corporation breathing down my neck or a bunch of other people looking over my shoulder. I don't work well when people are looking over my shoulders, so hang on just a second. All right, I'm back, but like with Midjourney, you have to do it on a public Discord where everyone's looking at you, and I don't work well like that. They say, our application currently works with openly licensed foundation models like SDXL, which allow artists to opt out of having their works included in the training sets. We believe that access to these open foundation models is crucial to artists remaining competitive and art being a free form of expression. We will continue to work with the open source community to improve features around tracking bias and respecting opt-outs. Opt-outs. I think that's kind of like a thing like if you want to be a good citizen and not generate any ill will. But again, if AI training isn't a transformative use, nothing is. And this is actually, I've been following like there's the OpenAI lawsuit, the Stability AI lawsuit, and the lawsuit against Meta that all of those writers have. And courts are throwing these out. They say, oh, well, they were trained on our intellectual property, and therefore that's a violation. Thrown out of court. Oh, well, they contain little compressed copies of our works, which they don't, so thrown out. These concepts, as we speak, are being thrown out of court right and left. So we'll have to see where it all... obviously some things are going to have to go up to the Supreme Court, but we'll see how things go. But yeah, for right now, a lot of these ideas are just being tossed out of court. if you want to, just not generate any ill will, I guess opt-outs are a nice way to go about doing things. But it shouldn't be a requirement. All right, artists should be able to protect outputs generated with the support AI when there is clear human conception and creativity guiding or influencing the output. And we've talked about this. You have to have some sort of human creativity to have a copyright. But not much. I've got a quickie on Feist v. Rural, where a telephone company sued a telephone directory for, stealing their listings, and the Supreme Court said, look, all you did was just take the listings and sort them alphabetically. That's not a creative thing. That's not a creative act. There's no human creativity there. And they said the requirement for creativity is small, but it is there. So that's just something you have to have. Many artists have tried one of the consumer-facing AI tools like DALL-E 2. You enter a phrase and out pops an image. You might append a famous artist name and out pops an image that's vaguely reminiscent of that artist's style. Now they say these types of outputs should not be copyrightable. I mean, I don't think anything should be copyrightable, but I'm not going to do that as a disclaimer. Just take that as a running disclaimer throughout the rest of the video. I'm just saying that so I don't get flamed on it, because I'm going to talk about things working in a framework of copyright, and I don't want people flaming in the comments, well, I thought you didn't believe in intellectual property. I don't. I've got the disclaimer out. We're just going to talk about it from here on. In these examples, the AI is more of a utility, like a search engine interpreting text and expressing that text into an image. So like if I go into Invoke AI and I pull up a model and I leave everything as the default, I don't type in anything, I just hit invoke, I'm going to get something. It's going to be kind of random, but I'm going to get something. There's no creativity there. It has to be human creativity, not a phone book, not that other case where the guy on YouTube kept making copyright strikes against other people because they stole his static. He had a random number generator basically generating visual static, the snow on a screen, and they're like, that's random, you can't do that, because there's no creativity there. So, you need at least some amount of creativity. And what they're saying is if you've put in no more creativity than you would in a search engine, or like you would if you're searching through a royalty-free library. You type in tree, and then boom, it pops up with a picture of a tree. Is there any real creativity there? But they say, however, Invoke's community members and many of the artists using generative AI today aren't simply entering a single input to generate an image. They have incorporated these tools into their existing creative processes and professional workflows. Yeah, because there's a whole lot more that goes into it. Shad's video on, him creating the Supergirl image really goes into a lot of that. But I think even absent that, if you look at his prompt was incredibly detailed, specifically set up. Different terms were weighted different ways. At some point, I think, even if all you're doing is typing in a prompt, at some point it's going to be more than just looking up something in a search engine, and it's going to actually become creative input. Now, Shad seems to feel that if you put anything at all into the prompt, that counts. But I think this is something that the courts are going to have to work out. If you just type in tree and you get a tree, is that enough creativity to count? Because the Supreme Court said the requirement for creativity is low, but it is there. So how much is that? Very much an open question. An artist might have the tool generate several concepts, take a sketch they've done, generate a rendered image that follows the same compositional structure and outline, or iterate on specific portions of an image. In many instances, they are almost in conversation with the tool, working through numerous manipulations in order to achieve their creative vision. And so he shows an example here where he's taken a sketch of his and then used the AI to turn it into a painting. In this case, the AI tool serves more like a digital paintbrush or a camera. I agree with Shad that a camera is really the most analogous form here, because with a camera, you set up everything, you compose the shot, you set the exposure and everything else the way you want it, get the right depth of field and everything else, and you're making all these creative decisions. Then you hit the button, and the camera actually makes the image. And then you take that and you pull it into Photoshop and Lightroom and do some other stuff with it. Same thing here. We argue that these works should be copyrightable, though we believe open source tooling needs to be developed to identify low-effort content without curbing the creative freedoms of artists trying to protect their original work. Tools from the Content Authenticity Initiatives show some early promise. Yeah, I'm not really sure about this, because unless you're sharing the original ping that has like all of the prompting and maybe even the workflow in the metadata, how are you really going to tell? Because there might be something that seems so simple that you've taken a lot of time and effort to get into the level of specificity that you want. But, you know, whatever tool you develop, unless it has access to the original metadata, it might look at that and say, oh, well, that was too easy, you know, when it wasn't. Or the other way around. You might have just lucked out and gotten exactly what you wanted by typing in 3 words and say, I'm going to go with that. How do you tell? How do you tell just by looking at the final output? That's going to be another issue. If we fail to protect the work that artists and creative professionals produce with these tools, we will see all the harms that come with the advance of AI capabilities and none of the benefits. By refusing to provide guidance on AI-enabled creativity, the U.S. Copyright Office is abdicating their responsibility to protect the work of creatives. I don't really think this is fair. The Copyright Office doesn't really have any decision-making authority. It's Congress that passes the laws to say what is copyrightable, what isn't, and the courts determine things like what's fair use and what isn't, and what's enough creativity to count. Those are the decision makers here. The Copyright Office is just a part of the executive branch. They don't have any of those powers. So they are, in large sense, just going to have to wait for the courts to hammer this out. We must demand clarity and advocate for a reasonable approach to protecting work which involves human conception and creative inputs in the process of generating content. And hopefully that'll come, but I mean, we're already seeing it happen with the court cases I mentioned. I've got updates on those going into my RSS reader, and I'll be providing updates on those probably on the podcast, so check that out. Distributing models intended and merchandised as directly copying the likeness of an individual or replicating an individual's body of work without their permission should be illegal. So there's a gray area here. If you're a public figure, people can use your images for purposes of satire or whatever. But they can't really use it, you know, if you're like doing a deep fake. Like if you do a deep fake of Joe Biden and you make him say something ridiculous, that's satire. But if you're trying to generate a news story that he actually said this real thing and that we need to oppose him and not vote for him, that would be wrong. And if you're not a public figure, then you're even more restricted in what you can do, because for a public figure, you have to show actual malice. For just a regular person, you just have to show damages. If you damage someone's reputation by making a deep fake, that's all you need to show. But usually, for the most part, people have their likeness rights. Like if someone went and used my videos to create deep fakes of me, I mean, I guess you could say I'm on YouTube. That sort of makes me a public figure. That's not a legal thing. I'm not going to be, don't hold me to that if anything ever comes to it. I don't know if I would count as a public figure or not, but you'd probably be okay making a satirical version of me doing silly things. But if you tried to actually forge a video of mine and present something as though it were my video and as though it were my opinions, especially if it isn't, that is where I might object and where you'd get into some legal hot water. We have rights to our likeness. We have rights to our opinions. We have rights to express those opinions, and actually faking or forging something like that is a violation of that. And the key word here is replicating their body of work. So there's a difference between that and making something in their style. You can't copyright a style. You can do something in the style of another artist, and that's fine. But there's a difference between that and doing a forgery. All the difference in the world. So as I've said, there absolutely are ethical issues with AI. Never denied that they are. They're just not the same as what a lot of people are screeching about. Alright, down here in their conclusions, and I'm not going to go into the call to action, because again, that's expired anyway. I just wanted to get these arguments out there for discussion purposes. When the camera and photography first emerged in the early 19th century, many in the art world and the government were skeptical about the idea of a machine capturing reality. It wasn't until 1865 that the Supreme Court granted copyright protection to photography, and it wasn't until 1940 that the Museum of Modern Art established a photography department. Today, photography is a celebrated art form, with photographers receiving many of the same protections for their work as the visual artists working in disciplines that came before them. And I have a video where I go over an essay from Charles Baudelaire about how terrible it's all the same fear-mongering that they're saying about AI today, that photography is doing. It's just so low effort. You just push a button and it does it for you, and you don't have to take that. Just pick up a brush. We keep hearing that. And they point out not everything captured with a camera is art, nor is it copyrightable, because today we understand that the camera is both an artist's tool and a mechanical instrument, depending on how it is used. We believe the same will be true for generative AI tools and the artists that use these tools. So, yeah, it's kind of like people trying to say, after they released Trump's mugshot and that backfired, as it was going to. Learn what the Streisand effect is, people. You had MSNBC, I think it was, boasting about, yes, we're going to get the mugshot of disgraced President Donald Trump, and then the actual mugshot came out, and it ended up being what it was. So then they started screeching, well, that's copyrightable, because all the Trump people, of course, were putting it on t-shirts, wanted Trump for president, things like that. They're trying to say, oh, no, that's copyrighted. Mugshots have never been copyrighted. Mugshots are about documenting. They're not about a creative work. Which is why, you see a newspaper article about a story and so was arrested. They'll generally show you the mugshot. Because they might be able to go on social media, grab a picture from there and use it, but that might be copyrighted. They know the mugshot isn't. Security footage, same kind of thing. There's no copyright on security footage, because there's no human creativity. There might be privacy issues, which is a different thing entirely, but no copyright. Same kind of concepts. We've just got to apply those to the new medium. So hopefully all this will get shaked out in a way that makes sense. Hopefully it won't get just made for the benefit of the big corporations and the rest of us are out in the dust. Really, you can't stop it now. There are too many open source tools out there that people are making. It's another one of those cases where the genie's already out of the bottle. And it's just a question of what sort of legal and regulatory environment are they going to force on the rest of us to make our lives miserable in the process. As it always is, and as the lessons finally need to be learned, so. Hopefully this will be a good basis for discussion. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And as always, go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. Go to Patreon, subscribe, star. You can be a regular supporter, get the videos early and ad-free, or just do a one-time donation. I keep saying this, and it's true. With cryptocurrency, just give me a few pennies, and that's probably worth all of the ads, or more than all of the ads, that you would see on this video if they played an ad, every single ad break, however many they slip those in. They've taken away even more control over us about that. It's not going to do much good complaining to the creator about where the ads are put. We can kind of make loose suggestions to YouTube, but the options keep being taken from us. So they just changed all that again. So sorry about that if they cut me off mid-sentence. I'm going to try to prevent that, but ultimately I don't have control. But if instead, if you're watching this, say on Odysee or Rumble where there are no ads, and you just want to help out, a few pennies in crypto will be all that's needed to kind of make up for you not viewing the ads. So please consider that. And above all, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.